Good evening. I'm Donna Herr. I'm from Keokuk, and I'm with Standing Bear Council.
And I'm Monica Thompson, and I live here in Quincy, and I am also from with Standing Bear Council.
And tonight we're going to focus on Native American children in boarding schools. It's an issue that touches us very dearly and nearly to our hearts because we've seen the effects from it. So I'm going to just go into the program and read off this paper, and you'll have to excuse me for reading because we haven't been able to go out and do any educational programs for over a year. So my mind got a little rusty, and so I'm going to have to read. The first Native American schools were for both white and Native students. Choctaw Academy in Kentucky for Native and whites was established in the early 1800s. The first school was for boys only. The Choctaw Seminary School was for both male and female, white and natives. And the first school was just for boys only. The Choctaw Seminary School was for both male and white, both male and female white natives. These schools were more successful than the later schools set up by the federal government. By 1851, the Cherokee of Oklahoma had opened male and female seminaries near Tahlequah to educate their members of the Cherokee Nation. Beginning in the 19th century, boarding schools played a big part in design of the U.S. government to foster assimilation of Native people into American society. The reformers and politicians favored a policy of reservation allotment and advanced the idea of placing Indian children in residential schools. They would learn to speak English, a vocation, and practice farming. The children would be isolated for several years from their families and diminish the influence of tribalism of the young people. The schools were more like prison camps than educational facilities. Many of the young children had traumatic experiences. They were forced to abandon their Indian identity and in many cases suffered mental and sexual abuse as documented in North Dakota. 50 years after the residential schools was established in 1879 in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, thousands of Indian children and youth were sent to live, work, and be educated in these schools. Upon arrival, they were doused in a bath of lye soap. Their hair was cut, their clothing was burned, and they were forbidden to speak their language. These schools were run by religious organizations, were set up, and Native children were forced to attend. The focus of these actions were to assimilate Native children to dominate the American cultures, language, values, and behaviors through a process of deculturalization. Unfortunately, residential schools were largely successful in this practice, and some are still in existence up to 1980. The Carlisle School is the most well-known Native school. The school was under the direction of Colonel Richard Pratt. The colonel is responsible for the following quote from a speech in 1892. A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one, and that high sanction of his destruction has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres. In a sense, I agree with the statement, but only this, that all the Indian is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him, save the man. Now, I want you to close your eyes for a moment and keep them closed until I tell you to open them. Imagine you are a child. You're standing with your parents in the doorway of your dwelling, and up rides these soldiers on horses with wagons. You don't know what's going to happen. You're afraid. Your parents are afraid. And they take you. They're taking you away from your parents. They're taking you away from your home. They are taking you to where you don't know. This is how they gathered the children up to take them to these schools. If you resisted, you were handcuffed, no matter your age. Can you imagine how you would feel? Open up your eyes, please. Can you imagine? Can you feel how they felt? The transition to boarding school life did not go smoothly for the children. Separation from family members and community, severe bouts of homesickness, and adjustments to new environment were overwhelming for them. Harsh policies and strictly regulated home visits only caused more issues. Disease was also a problem at the boarding schools. During the influenza pandemic of 1918, took the lives of many children. The contagious, painful eye disease known as trachoma afflicted nearly half of the boarding school population. Tuberculosis was also commonplace in these schools. And something you have to understand is that natives did not have the same resistance to these things as white people did because they were white people diseases. So that's why it was so hard on the children. Native American parents often charged government boarding schools of ravaging the health of their children. Some of the boarding schools even had their own cemeteries in which the children were buried. The death count of Native children in these schools is 135,000. That's the ones that they can account for. That doesn't include the ones of the children that ran away and didn't make it back home. And who knows what happened to them? There's no tracing of them. And some of the children that died in these schools, they cannot trace them either, so they're not sure what happened to them. The Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 officially granted U.S. citizenship to Native Americans. A committee was formed by the Institute for Government Research, and their findings became the Miriam Report. The report was a major investigation into Indian affairs and published in 1928. Confirmed the complaint of Indian families and students that the children were malnourished, sick, insufficiently clothed, overworked, harshly punished, and poorly trained. They were basically slaves that the white people were using to produce wood-crafted products, clothing, and so forth. During John Collier's tenure as Commissioner of Indian Affairs from 1935 to 1945, many schools closed or changed to day schools. Some boarding schools never were abandoned. A report in the late 1880s defended the early days of the schools. In the 1920s, a report concluded that children of federal boarding schools were malnourished, overworked, and poorly educated. And in 1969, a report declared Indian education to be a tragedy. I bet you didn't know that, did you? Okay. Having trouble with my paper. Under Franklin D. Roosevelt, Congress passed the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. This act reorganized the sovereignty of tribal lands and self-government. The Johnson-O'Malley Act was also passed, making states responsible for the education of Native American children. However, the further coercion of these policies without consultation with Native American educational crisis and the issue still persists today. Today, 1 in 4 Native children will commit suicide. 1 in 4 will die from violence or drug and alcohol abuse. 1 in 4 will be in prison. 1 in 4 will make it in life. Our people are hopeless, depressed, unemployed, divorced, alcoholics, and the list goes on. And now we'd like to talk a little bit about the family life of Native Americans with their children. And Monica's going to start telling you about that.
One of the things that started off before they got to the boarding schools, there were day schools on some of the reservations, and that's how they first started off. Because and that worked pretty good for a while, at least in the tribal ideas of things, because the kids were able to go to school, then come home and stay at home during the weekends and at night, and they still were able to maintain their families. But mostly tribes had seasonal economies, let's say, where they moved around because of kind of like in the early days of our farming communities, where the boys and sometimes the girls during the fall and would be gone from school because they would be harvesting crops, or in the spring they would be helping their families plant. Well, that's the same thing that the Indian tribes, the children did. Well, the people didn't particularly, that were in charge of those, didn't like the truancy. They called it truancy for the children, because they weren't in school all of September. And usually then April and May, that's when they started moving around again, because they had to hunt and things like that, collect berries and things like that. So that's why the boarding schools became a thing, because they felt that they needed to take the children away from the household so that they wouldn't be that truant. Instead of working with, they didn't ask the tribes about this. So when they took them away, and I know people who this happened to. One of my friends, he was a Mandan from North Dakota, and when he was 6, he had been kind of hidden from the people for the boarding schools, because he would be moved from grandmother to grandmother around on the tribe. But when he was 6, they caught up with him at one of the grandmother's houses, and they took him to the boarding school. They didn't ask questions. They didn't say, do you want to come? There he went. He just was taken. And he was there for a while. And he tried to run away. He finally did, and he made it home. But many times that didn't happen to a lot of the kids. They didn't make it home. And if they did run away, or they got caught and punishment ensued. But in the families, the problem that this happened is when they were taken away and they didn't get to grow up with their families, the chain of community was broken. And today on the reservations, it is hard, because the kids have a hard time understanding the tribal traditions, because they were taken away in a time when they would have been learned how to do different things and make things, and why they had ceremony and things like that, and why they talked their language instead of English, because they were not allowed in the boarding schools to talk in their own language. Some kids liked the boarding schools because maybe they didn't have anybody else at home anymore, but most of them had a very difficult time in the boarding schools. And the families had a very difficult time. Even today, with some of the schools that are still there, it is hard for the families because some schools nowadays have tried to incorporate traditional traditions, Indian traditions, in their schools, but that's taken a long time for them to come around to teaching and learning and incorporating those traditions, and allowing the kids to continue those traditions, and allowing the boys to have long hair if they want to, and the girls, instead of cutting it short. Long hair on a native is very important to them, and that's why they always had long hair. It was their memories. They remembered things. It was their memories of all that they had endured. So when they cut it, it was because they were letting go of stuff, letting go of the memories of somebody who died or something like that. So it was very important, even for all of them, to be able to keep their hair as they were growing up. So those were some of the things that have happened. And so nowadays, the kids, because they're on reservations in some of the poorest of our country, land of our country, they don't have and they can't move around like to hunt and do the things that they used to do. They don't have, there's not very much there's not very much employment. There's a lot of alcohol, and because alcohol is not a thing that they can tolerate. It does run because they are native. They have native blood. It's different. I have a native son, and I told him from the get-go, you cannot drink ever because you will be a alcoholic if you ever do. And he has stayed away from it because of that, because I have drilled that into him, because that is the way being native will do. It will give him a life of poor life forever if he ever goes that direction. And that's what happens a lot of times on the reservations, because there's no employment and there's no real community as much as some of them are coming back, but it is very difficult. The houses that you see on the reservation, I've been to the reservations. I was telling Donna, they're like a lot of, they're very, some of them out in the country are very much like shacks. You would be surprised at the lack of water and heat that they have. Some of them that are in little subdivision kind of places, little streets and cul-de-sacs are in very, very poor shape. And some of that is also because of the low self-esteem that the Indians have because of all the damage that's been done for generations with the education. They don't feel, people that take care of their places are people who, in any society and culture, are people who have pride in themselves and pride in their in who they are, and that's coming back in some places, but in some tribes. But it's been a long road back from the boarding schools, because the boarding schools did a lot of damage to the Native American culture. And the Carlisle School that she talked about is in Pennsylvania. So if you can imagine being a Mandan child or a Lakota child in South Dakota or North Dakota, or an Ojibwe child in Minnesota, and you are taken all the way to Pennsylvania, that's a long distance for a 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12-year-old. I mean, I don't know that I'd send my children that far when they were little, you know. And they were just taken there without any way of getting back on their own. And so that was where that school is. And so a lot of those schools were always far apart. And in Canada, there was also a lot of this going on, compulsory boarding schools. Haskell was another boarding school, and it's in Lawrence, Kansas, and it is now a college. It has been turned into a college, but after many years. But a lot of them are in different places around the country. Donna has a whole list of where they all were. I don't know how many, but there's a lot.
Yeah. There's pages of these Native American schools, and none of them are really good, but there are pages of this, just page after page. I didn't count them, but it's quite a substantial number. There are some colleges today that are just well-known colleges, and they started out as Native American colleges, and Yale and Harvard are two of them.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
The Hopi was another tribe that had, you know, all the tribes suffered residential boarding schools, children being taken. The Hopi, though, was one of the tribes that never forgot this transgression. In fact, two of their chiefs, or several of the men of the Hopi tribe, decided to just take up, be incarcerated at Alcatraz instead of allowing their children to go to the residential. Now, that's pretty. I mean, that's part of the Native American way. One of the reasons they were worried about their children going away to school was that they would learn more about materialism than they would generosity, because one of the virtues of being a Native American is being generous, and to those who are less fortunate, but those who need things. In Native American culture, the chief, a well-known chief, was he would give away everything he had to the people that needed it in his community if that was important, and they needed to live. He would give away. So that was a core belief in theirs, was generosity, being generous, and they were afraid that they would lose that going away to school, because it would be more about the newer culture, the dominant culture's way of being more materialistic. And so they were afraid of that. One of their fears.
One thing I did forget to mention when I was talking about the early schools, when they were out gathering up these children, when the word started getting out how bad the situation was at the schools, parents started hiding their children. They would hide them in the mountains. They would hide them in caves. They would hide them in forest, just so that the white people would not find them and take them away. And this went on basically in North Carolina and South Carolina. This started happening because they had a lot of areas down there they could hide their children, and that's what they did. Hid them.
Yeah, they did. They also, to protect their children from being taken, a friend of mine in Minnesota, he's half Ojibwe and half Norwegian. His mother, who was full Ojibwe, married a Norwegian. But his grandmother, her mother, when she gave birth to her child, wrote on the birth certificate white to keep her daughter from being taken as she grew up, to put and sent to the boarding schools. Many German communities and Irish communities also would help the Native people to kind of hide their children. So there was a lot of ways that they did, a lot of things they did to keep their children from going to boarding schools. So it was a very, that was their resistance to having that happen. Now there were some who did want to go to boarding school. As they got older, they wanted to go to trade school. There was the Flandreau Indian School, which was in Flandreau, South Dakota, and it became a trade school. And so there were boys who wanted to go to it to learn a trade so that they could make a living as they got older. But it was on an Indian reservation in Flandreau, South Dakota. So some schools were better because they were closer to the tribes.
You can hear all these problems and you can understand why it started breaking down the families, and all of the drugs and suicide and divorce and everything started taking hold, and just got enormous numbers involved in that because they didn't know what to do. They were trying to deal with the hurt of losing their children, and it just evolved into a huge mess. And it's still a mess today. Does anyone have any questions while we're on here? Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
I guess my question is, well, first of all, I want to comment that this problem was so much bigger than I imagined. But the Black Americans, now you hear so much about what happened to them and what our country has done to them. And why do you think we don't hear as much about what has happened to the Native Americans? And why isn't there a push to honor the treaties and to change some of these like it is with the Black culture?
Well, Native American people are not people to bring attention to themselves.
Okay.
They just never have been. It's because they have lost their self-esteem and self-pride in so many instances. which is just a bad thing that's happened to them. But they're just not confrontational like the Black Lives Matter group. And therefore, they're not getting that attention like the Black Lives Matter. It's sad that people have to go to that extent.
It's very distressing, I think.
Yes.
And I'm white European, so I don't know very much about all this, but when I look at the history of both, it actually seems that more damage was done to the Native Americans and to our country, and yet that is not recognized very often, and that's hard to understand. And it's wrong, but it's hard to understand why we do not recognize that more than to say, okay, we're going to have Indigenous Day, good for us. But there has to be more that American and the people that have done wrong, not on our treaties, do something. What do you think would have to happen to get people motivated on both sides to make some substantial changes?
We need to see change on the reservations.
Okay.
We need to see those updated, some housing facilities that are decent to live in. There needs to be better medical services, more jobs available. A lot of these people have to drive for hours to get to a job. But the big problem to start with is the transportation. They don't have the transportation to get there. And it just goes on and on and on, the list does. And it's just like a big snowball. It just keeps rolling and getting more snow on it.
Do you think that some of the young Native American are becoming more active in that or not?
Well, it depends upon where they live. At Pine Ridge,
I'm on a Zoom.
At Pine Ridge Reservation, they're going downhill terribly. They're becoming very dysfunctional. And some of the reservations that are where tribes live that have the gambling houses, casinos, they are doing better. Some of the casinos actually share all of the wealth with all of the tribe members. Good. Some of them do not. Some of them only go to the top level of the tribe, and money does not go down from there. So it's kind of a mixed bag. You just have to look at the whole picture and try to determine what is actually the problem. But there's greed in everybody. It doesn't make any difference if you're white, black, purple, or polka dotted. There's greed in people.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So, and greed just does not get you anywhere. So it's how it is.
So, another question, Donna.
Yes, Bruce.
We have a government agency that is, what's the word I want to use? That's their role is to help the Native American people, but that agency really isn't terribly functional either, is it?
You're talking about the BIA?
Yeah.
Bureau of Indian Affairs?
Bureau of Indian Affairs, yes. Thank you.
They're not particularly helpful, no, most of the time. That's
the sense I had.
They depends. I mean, in some places they can be helpful, but yeah, it sort of depends on if they have become compromised, because most of the Bureau of Indian Affairs people are Native people who then are supposed to help their people. And sort of depends on whether or not what my friend who is who's in Mandan, he said that they learned well white man's way of government. Okay.
Oh, not good.
How politicians and money and they learned that well.
And power. Yeah.
So that's why some tribes are not very good at sharing their money that they get. Other tribes have realized that they can help it's better if they can help. They can, their own, all their people, they will. There are some people on the Hopi reservation and the Navajo reservation that do that. They really are fighting for the life of their people and helping them to make it better. There's a tribe southwest of Minneapolis, Missouri. Or Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a Lakota tribe. They run and own Mystic Lake Casino, and all of their people get money from that casino, every one of them. And so they all have nice houses and nice schools and everything.
Another question then. So I was a young man when the Pine Ridge standoff took place. Did that hurt or help?
You're talking about Wounded Knee, the second one?
Well, yeah.
1973?
Yep.
It hurt because it was a massacre again for the second time.
Okay.
And so it because the government came in and massacred them. So it really didn't, they tried to protest what was going on and instead they got obliterated basically.
Yeah, those Dennis Banks and Russell Means and that group. Yeah.
Yes, it was AIM. Yeah.
Yep.
But AIM is still in operation today. There is still an American Indian movement. They are still in operation. They still do things more in a better, I think they've kind of learned a few things to also how to do things and get things done without getting massacred.
Yeah. Okay.
But they are still in operation. In fact, at many powwows, you will see AIM people there because they run security for powwows most of the time.
Oh.
Yes. Anybody else have a question?
Yeah, I have another question.
Okay.
So you say some of these schools are still in existence and they're trying to teach some of the native philosophy and ways.
Yes.
How much are they balancing that between trying to shove Christianity down their throats?
Well, Bruce, today a lot of these schools today are run by Catholic churches.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the children are learning Catholic education.
Ooh.
But the ones that I donate to personally have gone back to teaching their old ways of the language, traditions, dancing, trying to get the kids back into their ancestry, and hoping that this is going to help the younger people coming up.
Yeah, well, I got on a mailing list apparently because I get all these, and I would be interested in sometime offline finding out which ones.
Yeah, well, there's Pine Ridge has it's either I think it's Holy Family. Rosebud has St. Francis. There's St. Labray out in Montana. These are all Catholic places.
Yeah, St. Joseph.
St. Joseph's in Chamberlain. And those are four that I know of that also teach. They do the native ceremonies and the native teach and also have classes now of language at the school and teach that. But they are, all of these schools are on the reservation. They are not the boarding schools they are boarding schools, but they are not boarding schools like Carlisle was over here in Pennsylvania and their families lived in South Dakota.
Okay.
So these are schools that are on the reservation. But yes, the Catholic schools are bringing their traditions back into what they do.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question about, I read the book some time ago and it talked about almost the origin of the FBI, and it was based on a lot of the homicides of, I think it was the Osage women in Oklahoma, and that they were being murdered to get the rights to their property because of how it was written, how the laws were written, that if they married a white person or they died, then they could get the land. So all these women were turning up murder, and that's where Herbert Hoover apparently stepped in and did what he does. Does anything like that happen today where the non-Indian people are still trying to take from the Indians what they do have?
Of course.
Well,
Just look at the oil people.
And the
If you-
pipeline?
Yes, the pipeline people.
Pipeline? Okay.
Oil companies, if there's oil on a reservation, they will dig underground drilling and suck it out from under them because the natives won't let them drill on their land.
Mhm.
So they steal
Good.
it.
Well, they gave the land to the Indians that they thought was useless.
Exactly.
And so so you're telling me that if they find a use for it, they want it back in some way.
Oh, of course.
In North Dakota, in the Balkan Reserve, okay, that's most of North Dakota where the three affiliated tribes live, which is up in Newtown and Mandan. It's north of Bismarck, and Mandaree, and in there, they've been drilling for oil up there for the last, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years, because it's a very rich oil reserve. Now, one of the things that they have done is now some of the natives, because my friend who's a Mandan, he has land up there, family land. Now, he never sold his rights. He allowed access to his land, but he didn't ever sell his rights, and he gets like royalties from it, okay, because he gave them right of way across his land to either put pipes or to go on it and drill and things like that, and so did his brothers and sisters. They all get royalties. But there are a lot of other people who, instead of keeping their mineral rights of the land, they instead decided to sell out and get a lump sum, kind of like somebody who, a lot of other things that could happen to anybody else. They got a lump sum, and he said, oh, they should never have done that because many people blow through money. You know, like when you win the lottery, you get $100,000, and all of a sudden you're broke several months down the road because you haven't done anything with that $100,000 or $1 million or whatever. Same thing with them. A lot of times they would be broke then again later on, whereas my friend is never broke. He always gets a royalty payment every month. You know.
What tribe did you? What tribe did you say he belonged to?
Mandan. He lives
Mandan.
Yes, they are known as the Earth Lodge people. They built the earthen lodges, and they were the people who had Lewis and Clark and their entourage not found them. If they had not found them, Lewis and Clark and all of those people would have died of starvation in the wintertime, because the Mandan people said, come on into our village, we'll keep you over the winter and help you on your way.
Oh, okay.
So because they were farmers, they stayed in one place up on the upper Missouri River where they lived up by.
Okay.
So Mandan, yes. And they're also affiliated because there's 3 tribes with them called the 3 affiliated tribes. So the Hidatsa and the Arikara are 2 other tribes that live in proximity, but they're also earth-based people, Earth Lodge people. They build earth lodges.
Okay. What does that mean exactly?
Earth lodges?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so Lakotas and the Plains Indians all lived in teepees and moved around a lot.
Yeah.
The Earth Lodge people built lodges with very strong tree trunks and then packed it with earth, okay, on top and around, like your first what we would call a berm house, okay? Only theirs were round, okay, at the top, okay? They were rounded. Ours, we stick them in the side of the hill, okay?
Hill, okay.
You know, okay?
So it's more permanent.
It's a very permanent.
So
you are not gonna pick this house up and move it anywhere.
Okay.
They do not move. They did go out on the plains and hunt buffalo, and they would take teepees with them and use them, but they were not like the Lakota,
Like a tent, yeah.
the Arapaho, or the Cheyenne, who moved around all the time and you lived in teepees. The Mandan, Arikara, and the Hidatsa lived on the upper Missouri up there, and they were farmers. They lived in these earth lodges.
Huh, okay.
So
Are they anything like, my granddaughter lived in Virginia, and we went to the Jamestown area and all that, and then I think it was Powhatan tribe. Do I have that right?
Yeah,
they had like an oblong house.
Okay.
Was those permanent as well?
No. Yes, they were permanent. Those were long houses. Okay, they were called long houses, built with wood. Okay, and then usually covered in woven reed mats. Okay, but yes, they were permanent. They didn't move around. Teepees were the only things that they moved around. Okay, then the other thing that they did was some of the eastern woodland tribes would build what they called wickiups, which were built out of like willow that were woven together and then covered with woven mats, reed mats.
What'd you call it?
Wickiups, Wikiup, I think.
Okay, Whippy. Okay.
Wickiup. And that was also a smaller form of a house. Those were not movable really either, although they could be picked up and moved a little bit, but they were not movable either. The eastern woodland tribes were also pretty permanent. They didn't move around a lot. They did go hunting. They had places that they hunted, and went hunting. Any other questions?
This may be kind of separate. With the DACA kids, my understanding is that some of them are also Native Americans. Is that anything you're familiar? They're not. They're mostly Hispanics.
Yeah, DACA means children who came in with their parents that were immigrants.
Okay.
And were children. Okay. And so that's what the Native Americans were here. Okay. Already. They didn't.
So they can vote. So they can vote.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, they didn't get to vote until it was 1924, and it was another 10 years before they actually got to vote.
Okay.
And this was our country to start with. Go figure.
Yeah. I went when I lived in DC. They had at one of the history museums, they had something called American Expansionism. Took up a whole floor, and when I got out of there, I was just appalled. I mean, at every piece of our land here belonged to somebody else, and then when somebody else came in, we took it from them, the Europeans, and it was appalling. We won it, we took it. Let's go have part of Mexico. I'm appalled. So I don't. That's why I was asking you, what can we do now after we've created this mess?
Well, Native Americans believe very strongly in creator. You call him God. We call him creator. And Native Americans believe that the land belonged to creator. And we were just here to live on his land
Be stewards.
and, yeah, to take care of it. And somewhere along the line, that wasn't in the white people's thinking. They had to have ownership of this and ownership of that. And Keokuk is a good example because that was the half-breed track. And so the half-breeds moved to Keokuk and were able to have land. Well, then that all got turned around when the white folks started coming in, and they ended up losing their land, got taken by the whites again, and they left. But they were not people, the natives were not people that would fight for it. They would just leave. So, and you had two chiefs. You had a peace chief and a war chief. And Chief Keokuk was a peace chief.
I did not know that.
Chief Blackhawk up the river was the war chief of the Fox and Sauk tribe that lived in that area.
Okay. Did not know that.
That's why Chief Blackhawk has a statue and honoring in Fort Madison, and Chief Keokuk is in Keokuk.
Keokuk, yeah. Oh, okay.
Just a little outside history there. Any other questions? Surely.
We did a great job.
Is there any particular resources, books in particular or whatever that would kind of create more knowledge or gain more knowledge of what you're talking about? Oh, what do you have there?
I have a book I picked up out here in the lobby of the library called Native Native Universe, Voices of Indian America. And it does have a chapter on education and the boarding schools.
Okay.
And information about that. It has a lot of different chapters about a lot of different things. Lots of pictures too. That might give you some good information on if you're looking.
Okay.
Then, I don't know. Did you have a paper that has all the kinds of things that you looked up?
No. I'll tell you, I use Wikipedia on the computer a lot. They have a lot of good resources in there on Native American. Just Google Native American schools or anything else Native American, and they have a lot of information, a lot of good pictures.
Okay.
And they also have a lot of good reference points that you can go to for other information. And they also always have a list of the references that they've used in their article so that you can go to that.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I do want to show you one picture real quick here. This is a picture of our council with the Aztec Dancers from Wisconsin, and they appeared here in Quincy at our winter gathering. I want you to see this.
Oh my. I love the intermingling too.
Yes.
That's fabulous.
Well, hi, Bruce. We get to see your face.
Yeah.
So when we have our next gathering, whether it's in the summer next year and then the fall of 2022, be sure to come. January of 2022.
Yeah, January of 2022.
Or summer sometime next year.
COVID has played havoc with a lot of our stuff this year. We just haven't been able to go out and do anything. And this is the first program we've done in over a year because we haven't been able to go out and do them. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so I plugged my camera in just because I have a reference that I use called Americans. It contains a huge amount of information and very, very well written, very concise. So
thank you, Bruce.
Yes. Katie's going to jump in.
I can't.
Thank you, Donna and Monica.
Katie, I don't think they can hear you.
No. You're not coming across very good.
She's not
I don't
coming
hear Katie
across.
at all.
Yeah, okay.
Well, Katie says thank you.
No.
And without Katie's help, we would not be doing this.
Tell Katie she knows where that Native American book in the lobby is going to go.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Thank you
joining.
so much. This was wonderful, and I hope you do it again with another kind of topic or whatever. That'd be wonderful.
We do go out and do a program with Native American artifacts that we have in our possession. And we do a lot of school programs.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
I look forward to it.
Okay. We look
Thank
forward
you very
to seeing
much,
you
both
again.
of you. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, Dan.
Bye-bye.